Gallery and Education Center, Michelle Carlson, the Acting Executive Director. We're so happy to see all of you here this evening. We have a special guest, artist tonight, Trevor Grabill, who has a very wonderful show up. Just so you know, we are going to film his talk. We're going to record it. It will be posted to our website at a later date, but we'll just have the camera on him. So if you don't want to be in the video, don't walk in front. With Katrina Daniels, I'd like to welcome. She's our exhibitions director, and she'll be moderating the talk tonight. So thank you, Katrina.
Thank you all. Trevor and I are just going to have a conversation about this body of work and his process. At any point in time, if anybody has a question, you're welcome to raise a hand. We'll ask questions, or if you want to wait afterwards and have a one-on-one with Trevor, or find out a little bit about a specific piece, feel free to do that. I'm just going to hand this off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. There's my super fancy headset. So again, everyone, welcome. We have a couple more seats. If anybody does need a spot to sit, please let us know. We do have more chairs that we can grab too. So Trevor, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hi. I'm Trevor Grabill. I am an artist and teacher in Kalamazoo, and I've been making prints like these for around 15 years now.
So the title of this show is Backyard Spirits. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the title?
Sure. So I'm personally really excited about the way that observation and spending a lot of time with something can kind of sort of create a deeper relationship with it. And because of COVID, like a lot of us, I've spent a lot of the past 2 years a lot closer to home than I'm used to, and become very invested in spaces like my backyard or the block that I live on or the neighborhood that I live in a both practical way and also just in sort of a spiritual way. And so Backyard Spirits is a reference to these pieces, I would say, are all things that I sort of stumbled upon communing with those spirits in the backyard, both literally and in a slightly broader sense than a physical backyard.
Thank you. I love hearing that. I think I also have found solace in a lot of those like sort of smaller moments. I think pre-COVID, I was searching maybe beauty in like more grand spaces, but have really, I live like kind of off this dirt road, but I grew up in a city, so watching the farmland grow has been like really kind of magical to me. Mm-hmm. So I understand that kind of just like slowing down and finding sort of the magical moments in that. So you touched a little bit on this, just kind of explaining the title for this work, but you could speak to this specifically or a little bit more broadly. But what inspires your work?
So in a, motivational sense, what inspires me to make work is a desire to be fascinated with the world that I live in. I think that it's really easy in the media environment we live in sort of the spectacle that we're all kind of constantly exposed to gloss over both the really terrible and really wonderful parts of our immediate world and sort of make things banal and not really register them. And so my hope is to just really be interested in the world around me, and it's my belief that boredom and hopelessness kind of go together, so being fascinated is kind of a form of, or gesture rather, of hope. So I think that's what I would say I'm most inspired by.
I love that. I was recently took a little time off and went to Acadia National Park, which is in Maine, and there was this area where the water just really came up and made this huge sound, and there were some children there, and one of them looked up and said, "This is the most amazing place in the world." And I was like, it is. And like nature is really incredible, and taking those moments to just stop and Yeah, just take it, and I really appreciate that. So, and then kind of, I wanted to turn a little bit to talk about process. So obviously Trevor is a printmaker, and your work is relief prints. Could you both, like for folks who might not know what that is, kind of maybe explain what that is, and then why is that like a manner of making that you're drawn to?
Sure. So relief prints are probably the form of printmaking that most of us have the most experience with. It's essentially a stamp. So it's a hand-carved stamp. I'm going in, and most of the time I'm working with wood. Some of these are linoleum. But in any case, what I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm removing the parts of the block that I don't want to print. I'm rolling ink on the surface. And then for the smaller prints, like these ones that are arranged in a grid over here, I'm sending them through a small press that I have at home. And then for the bigger prints, what I'll do is I'll carve the block, roll ink on the surface, put the paper down on top, and then I burnish the back with a tool called a baron. So for multiple colors, pieces that have multiple colors in them, for example, the pink and the purple here, I don't know if I'm stuck on the camera. For the pink and the purple in this piece over here, each of those is a separate carved block and they're layered on top of each other. And so the reason, one of the main reasons that I'm most excited about to work with prints is that there's so many steps to the process. There's so much that comes between me having a thought about what I would like to make an image of and what the final image is. So I'll recognize something that I want to draw, and then I'll draw it, and then I'll edit the drawing, and then I'll carve it, and then I'll ink it, and then I'll print it, and then I'll go back and fix something. And all that back and forth, I feel like kind of, in some ways, sort of polishes what I find most important about the image. It kind of gives me lots of opportunities to figure out what it is the print is about. There's a quote that I really like by the sculptor Elizabeth King, and I say this quote a lot. It's, process saves us from the poverty of our intentions, which I take to mean that like the idea is okay to start out with, but it's the act of like bringing it into the world that sort of helps me figure out what I'm excited about in the image. And so, yeah, that's a big part of why I choose printmaking to make images.
Could you hold the mic up just a little bit close? Thank
Sure,
you.
yeah.
Okay, so for your artistic practice, when you're starting to work in your studio, do you come in with a plan, sort of an outline of what you want to make, or is it a more free-flowing practice where you are just kind of letting the mood take you?
Sure. I feel like I alternate between two practices. I definitely have periods of time that are very unstructured, and I think of that as kind of an inventive period where I'm doing a lot of drawing, and it also, at least to me, kind of looks like I'm doing a lot of nothing, doing a lot of sitting and thinking and imagining what the work might be. And that's usually very unstructured practice, sort of like slowly exploring what the work could be. And then I'll switch over after doing that for a while to spend weeks or months in more of an executive practice where I'm doing a lot of carving, a lot of printing, sort of rounding out work and finishing it and figuring out, you know, what the final piece is going to be like.
And when you are working on, especially on a body of work, something like this, are you drawn to a particular theme before you get started? Or have you ever found where there's like one piece that sort of speaks to you and then maybe an entire body of work spawns off of that?
Sure. I don't think that there's not groups of work generally inspired by themes. I try to just make a lot of work based on whatever's in front of me, and the theming part of the process sort of comes afterward. It's more of an editing where I'll draw as much as I can and make as many of those into prints as I can, and then later come back and decide, oh, I see those are all communicating with each other, they all relate to each other in this way, as opposed to deciding beforehand I want to make lots of prints of flowers, which I do end up doing, but...
I kind of, when we were installing the show, there was a little bit of that where we were like, these pieces are speaking to each other. Not, you know, these have to live over here. So sometimes when you step away, like it starts to kind of open itself up to you. Can you tell us what stimulates your creativity?
I go on a lot of bike rides, and that's like a big part of getting things flowing, sort of getting into that observational process. Definitely mindfulness meditation, which is also sort of a way to be present in the world and to observe and to engage with the world. And conversations with friends, definitely sitting and talking with people leads to a lot of work that I wouldn't expect otherwise. So.
And as a teacher, do you ever find that working with your students and maybe explaining the process or even kind of seeing what they're doing, does that ever, kind of spark an idea?
Totally. Students, particularly when they're newest to the medium, are coming up with solutions to problems that there's a very old solution to this problem, and they're coming up with out of left field, completely different solution that blows my mind. And also, more than ideas for specific work, I think that working as a teacher definitely leads me to be kinder with myself and with the work, and sort of give it a little bit of room to breathe and figure out what it's going to be, as opposed to be engaged in judgment the whole time and decide like, all right, I got to give this up if it doesn't look like it's going to be a good print, if it doesn't look like it's going to work out. Watching people work through their work inspires me to be patient with myself as well. So.
I kind of feel like that sometimes working with like interns, people who kind of just have those moments where you're like, oh, that's right, this is why I went into this field.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
Can you speak to how your practice has changed over time? And this could be, I know you spoke to a little bit about the last couple of years, or it could be a longer term trajectory, whichever feels right.
Sure. I think that that kind of ties pretty well into that last question, where I think my practice has grown a lot more patient with myself. That can be both in terms of like letting a piece kind of figure out in what way it needs to be unsuccessful to kind of get to successful. It also looks like over the past maybe 6 to 9 months or so, I've increased the number of layers that I like to work with in a piece. There's a couple of pieces in here that have like 3 or 4 layers, which is something that I kind of felt a sense of urgency before, and was like, oh, I need to make as many prints as possible. I can't spend that much time on one piece. And I think that my practice has grown a lot more ready to give pieces the time they need to kind of grow up and become who they are.
Can you speak to also like these particular pieces where you're using the cradle panel, and then also, I don't know if our audience has seen it when you get up close. If you take a look, you'll see that there are different types of paper that Trevor's using for that he's mounting his work on. Can you speak to both of those, like maybe why you chose the cradle panel and also the different types of paper you're printing on?
Sure. So the panels were kind of the solution that I landed on leading up to the show, where I was just feeling frustrated with glass as a material, which my spouse pointed out I was being very finicky about, but it was just really bothering me how shiny it was, and that these aren't shiny pieces. And you'll notice that there are some framed pieces, and all of the framed pieces are numbered, and that's because I decided that if it was a numbered piece, it wasn't going on a panel. But for the panel, I wanted the print itself to be kind of immediate and accessible to the viewer. I wanted it to be right there on the surface. And I also really like that it feels like a fully integrated object. For a framed piece, I kind of feel like what you have is a case for preserving a print, whereas these mounted prints, it feels like the whole object works together. The different papers that I use are kind of calibrated to the different ways that I'm printing. So I talked a little bit about how some of these pieces are printed on a small press, which is really just kind of something that sandwiches the paper and the block together. For those pieces, I'm using paper made here in Michigan at a company called French Paper Company. It's made in Niles. It's a thick, heavy, what we'd call like a cardstock or something like that.
So it's like these ones with a whiter background?
Yeah, exactly. And so those are going to be more opaque because the paper is thicker, so you're not going to be able to see the wood grain coming through, whereas these pieces that are larger, that you can't see the wood grain on them, they're printed with, generally with Thai Kozo paper, which is a kind of mulberry paper. It's thinner, and allows me to print the piece by hand. It allows that pressure to transfer through a lot better. So.
One of my friends who's an artist who was here looking at your work earlier, and I didn't mention anything about like the reasoning of the work behind the glass, and she just said, "Oh, it's so freeing not to have all the work behind glass."
I'm glad I'm not alone in that.
No, yeah, she really responded to that. Is there anything lately or something that you're kind of looking forward to that you've been particularly drawn to?
Sure. I definitely, like I said before, I'm excited about working with more and more layers and pieces. This little book right here is a very new piece, and I feel excited about working in that way that has sort of a narrative and allows pieces to build off of each other. And also, you know, even though it's sort of just a presentation, putting these pieces on the panels gave me a lot of ideas for how the prints could sort of work together in a sculptural way. And so I guess those are all different ways that the prints kind of gain another dimension that I feel excited about.
You know, when we were installing, we were talking a lot about like art as object and really intentional about the display and how we wanted people to kind of see the work in the round. And one of the things that we often ask our artists is, what advice could you give someone to inspire them to create something, whether that's an emerging artist or maybe somebody who is new to the field?
Mm-hmm. The advice that I like to give students, and this is kind of paraphrasing the artist Karita Kent, is that judgment and creativity are two opposite processes, and when you try to do them at the same time, they cancel each other out. So if you can find a way to make without deciding whether it's good or what it means or what it's about, and then come back later and return to that piece, kind of brings a lot more fun into the process. And I think fun is what carries us through to keep making. So
I think that's an excellent piece of advice just for life. And before we open it up for audience questions, I just wanted to let everybody know that the work is available for sale today, so if you want to make a purchase, please let one of us know. You will see some red dots on some of the pieces. And I also wanted to thank our exhibit sponsor, Hootie Legal Services, for supporting this project as a nonprofit. We really rely on the community to support the work that we do. Does anybody have any questions for Trevor about his process or inspiration or about any of the pieces? Yes.
What's the largest number of blocks that you use to make a single piece?
Well, so that kind of gets into the weeds, but there is, some of these pieces are what's called a reduction print. So instead of working with multiple blocks, I'm removing from the same block and creating more. So it's not the greatest number of blocks, but the greatest number of layers I've worked with so far is 7. So, yep, I was working with a friend's collage, and I was adapting that into a relief print. And when you're creating an image without the intention of making a print, you're not creating in a way that like reduces the number of colors that go into it. So when I work with other people's images, I feel like that's when I end up getting into the most layers, because they haven't kind of had that forcible restriction going on as in the creative process. So.
I probably asked you this like years ago, but when you're working with wood blocks, do you tend to try to work with the grain and try to use the grain as part of the piece and make those shapes, or do you try to ignore them so that they come weird, surprising, and mixing them?
There's definitely pieces where I'll see a block and see the wood grain in it, and I'll say, oh, that wood grain is special, and the image will grow around that piece. A good example of that one is along that back wall there. It's 3 people holding each other, and there's wood grain at the bottom that the whole piece grew out of. There's definitely other pieces. This big one here is a good example where the wood grain, while I appreciate what it does in the image, is sort of an afterthought. It happens and sort of brings its own joy to the piece that I didn't intend or even think for. So.
Yeah, Butter?
Hi, thank you. One question question is like, does your art come with a message itself in general, or do you think in particular, like you get inspired for one and do it, and then another one, different message?
So I think that there's both. I think the overarching message that I would hope for would be that our small lives are precious and our world is precious, and like the little actions that can feel overwhelmed by the bigger world are deeply important would be the overarching message. And then I was talking a little bit earlier about how I go back and select for which prints or images I feel are most successful and kind of move those along. And what I'm selecting for when I do that is some kind of intensity of emotion or subtlety of emotion. So I guess that would be the other answer to that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Is that you did that from reality, and or it comes from your imagination?
So this piece in particular,
Yeah.
so the flowers were drawn from life. It is a peony and a crocus, or an adaptation of the two. And then everything else in here is invented. The buildings, the textures, the images.
I like the life you did in a little square on the bottom. They represent everything else.
Yeah.
What's happening in the city or in a house.
Yeah,
I like it.
thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Trevor. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Of course, you're welcome to mingle, ask Trevor questions, come see the work a little bit more closely. We do have refreshments over near the front door, and then the second level is also open this evening if you wanted to see. We have children's artwork on exhibit up there. Thank you again.
Thank you.